Today's class is a low back flow. We're going to be focusing on strengthening and mobilizing the low back, as well as really engaging the deep core to help support the low back. This is going to be a great class to come back to if you tend to experience low back pain or discomfort pretty frequently. We're going to start on our backs, checking in with our triple S. And just noticing right away if it's easy for you to get that low back down or if you have a big lift between your low back and the mat. So that is really showing the pelvis's tendency to tip forward. So it might feel a little challenging to hold the sacrum, that low back right above the tailbone down on the mat. We're going to bring the hands to the ribs and start with our 360 breath. As you inhale, feel the rib cage expand into your hands, front, side, and back. As you exhale, work to empty the breath all the way out and almost feel like those front ribs are knitting in as you exhale. Inhale, feel the rib cage expand side to side and front to back. Exhale, knit those front ribs in. Take a few more of these big 360 breaths. So by breathing in this 360-degree expansion, we're mobilizing the ribs. We're creating a calmer state in the mind and body by triggering that parasympathetic nervous system, slowing the breath down. And we're beginning to work the core already. So when we use this integrated 360 breath, we're engaging the muscles of the deep core and the pelvic floor, which includes the diaphragm, the pelvic floor muscles, and the transverse abdominis. So it's almost like when we exhale, everything's wrapping in towards center. Hands will come to your thighs. And we're going to do a little bit of pelvic tilting here. As you inhale, you're going to tip your pelvis forward, which again looks like lifting the low back or arching the low back. As you exhale, really press your sacrum right above the tailbone down and almost lift the tailbone up. Inhale, tip the pelvis forward, arching the low back, so that would be anteriorly tipping the pelvis forward. As you exhale, press the sacrum down, curl the tailbone up. So that's a posterior tilt or tipping backwards. One more. Inhale, tip the pelvis forward. Exhale, lift the tailbone up, press the sacrum down. Now come back to that neutral, so not tipping forward, not tipping back, somewhere right in the middle where that sacrum is down. That's our neutral pelvis. Check in with how your low back feels right now. We're going to press into the feet. Really check that the back of your skull and your shoulder blades or scapula stay on the mat. Pressing into your feet, you're going to curl the tailbone up, but keep the sacrum down. So we're almost in that posterior tilt. Now lift up just a tiny bit higher using your glutes. We've maybe lifted one vertebra off the mat. It's a teeny tiny lift. Then lift a little bit more. But we're really squeezing the glutes, lifting up as slowly as we can into this low bridge. Holding that neutral pelvis. So we're imagining those pelvic points drawing in, pubic bone lifting up to the belly. And then just as slowly as you lift it up, lower back down, but keep that strength in the glutes. Keep that pelvis neutral. So it takes a lot of that deep core to lower down slowly, with the sacrum coming down very last. We're going to do that a few more times as slowly as you can. Squeeze the glutes, lift into that low bridge. So we're staying low enough in our bridge that our shoulder blades don't lift up off the mat. Once you get to the top of your low bridge, slowly lower down with strength and control. One more time. Lift up when you're ready, as slowly as you can. Activate the glutes, draw those pelvic points in. When you're ready to lower, lower as slowly as you can. Sacrum comes down last. Hands will come behind the head so we can start to work that deep core, drawing the elbows in toward the face. Check that we haven't lifted any part of the back off the ground. So hold the sacrum down, hold your shoulder blades down. Take a big inhale here. As you exhale, lift up off your scapula, your shoulder blades. It's a tiny lift. It's not a big crunch. Tuck your chin towards your throat. Lean your head back into your hands without lowering the shoulder blades back onto the mat, and just kind of feel the whole front of the body, especially around the rib cage, light up. Inhale to lower. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat. Knit those front ribs together. Draw your pelvic points in. Inhale to lower. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat. Think about lifting your pubic bone up towards your belly button. Inhale to lower. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat. Feel everything pull down toward the sacrum, toward the low back. Inhale to lower. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat, knit those front ribs in. Zipper the pubic bone up toward the belly. Inhale to lower. One more. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat. Draw those pelvic points in. Feel the front of the pelvis pull down toward the sacrum. Inhale to lower. We're going to come into a quadruped, coming onto hands and knees, checking in with the low back. So we're going to bring the shoulders right over the wrist creases, hips over the knees in this quadruped position. Lift the front of your throat up so we can help support the spine by not letting the head drop down. We want to keep the front of the throat lifting so the neck is neutral. We're going to do those same pelvic tilts we did on our back. So notice where your head is, notice where your shoulder blades are, and we're going to try to keep those in place without moving, focusing just on the low back. So we'll inhale, tip the pelvis forward. That looks like the belly dropping down a little bit, tailbone almost flipping up toward the ceiling so the low back arches. Exhale, round just the low back like we're trying to tip the tailbone under. Inhale, pelvis tips forward, anteriorly tip the pelvis. Exhale, tip the pelvis backwards, rounding the low back. You're going to keep doing that just back and forth. It's really small, so we don't want a cat-cow here yet. We're not moving the whole spine, the upper back. The upper back, the thoracic spine, and the cervical spine are not moving. We're just feeling that lumbar cat-cow. So just the pelvis is doing the moving forward and back. And just notice what it feels like when you tip forward and tip backwards. Is there any pain? Is there any pinching? We've got two options to stretch out that low back. The first one I'll show is a child's pose, taking the knees as wide as you'd like. We're going to side bend in our child's pose. So hands will walk over toward the right corner of the mat so that you get a stretch along the left side of the body. And then after a few breaths, you'll switch to the left side of the mat to stretch the right side of the body. So you can take that option, or you can come into a downward dog, tucking the toes, lifting the pelvis up, walking the feet in a good bit. So we're going to keep the weight in the hands and crouch side to side, which looks like the knees and the toes turning to one side of the mat. And maybe that's enough of a stretch. We want to keep the arms really strong without letting the chest sink down toward the ground. And then try the other side. Bend the knees and toes, turning them to the other side of the mat, keeping the weight in the arms. Now, as you switch and you find that you could use a little more stretch, you can sit the hips back while you crouch and alternate like that. So whatever you're doing, either child's pose or these down dog crouches, focus on any sensation in the low back, but keep that core engaged, especially if you're in that down dog crouch. So the low belly is always going to help to support the low back. Make your way back to quadruped. Take a few rounds of cat-cow to stretch everything out. So now when we move through cat-cow, we're moving the lumbar spine, the back of the pelvis, the sacrum, all the way up through the thoracic spine, the cervical spine if you're involving the neck and the head. So just move in any way or any pace that feels good. Mobilizing the back, maybe stretching out some of that tight tissue. Again, we'll come to a downward dog, shoulders right over your wrist. Lift the front of your throat. Imagine a broom behind your back touching the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum. Keep that imaginary broom behind your back as you lift into down dog. Walking the feet in, bending the knees. So we're going to keep the heels lifted and just pedal the feet out. So we want to keep the knees bent and keep the heels lifted, even if you can comfortably touch the heels down. We're going to get used to this shorter stance in downward dog so we can lengthen out the low back instead of rounding it. So we want that neutral pelvis here, lifting the pelvic points up, drawing those pelvic points in. And just like our core work, think about your pubic bone lifting toward the belly button. Hands will walk back toward the feet, coming into a happy squat, sitting back toward the heels, press into the big toes, the heels. We're in a triple flexion here. Our ankles are flexed, our knees are flexed, and our hips are flexed. Our glutes are really working. So if you're dropping here and if you're feeling a pull in the low back, we want more of a lift. So this is a lot of strength going on. We're not collapsing or dropping. We're engaging the core and the glutes to keep that feeling of the broom behind the back. Use your glutes so that we're not feeling the low back as we rise to stand. So the movement comes from the hips and the glutes, and we're not lifting from the low back. Walk to the top of your mat. And let's check in with our posture. As you're standing, just stand as tall as you can. Check in with how your low back feels. We're going to bring our fingers to our ears. So you can do index fingers in the ears. We're going to find our plumb line, which will help us stand with a more neutral posture. With your fingers in your ears, draw your elbows back. So really feel that centrated position of the shoulders so they're right in the middle of the shoulder socket. But knit those front ribs in. So we don't want to draw the elbows back and pop the ribs or move the thoracic spine. We want to keep the ribs in, draw the elbows back. Now without moving the shoulders, slowly lower your hands, keeping the shoulders in that position. And just check, see if it feels any different. It probably feels different in the shoulders. That's a great way to check if we stand with our shoulders rounding forward. So that plumb line that we're finding runs from the center of the ear, center of the shoulder, down the center of the hip, knee, all the way to the ankle. So it's just another way to visualize that triple S stacking or that broom behind your back. Reach your arms forward and up. Shoulder blades glide up. Exhale, hinge. Torso's coming toward the thighs, just like that happy squat. Press into the toes and heels, really flexing at the hips. We're going to step into a plank pose. You can always take a quadruped instead. Imagine that standing posture here. Is your head over your shoulders, over your pelvis? Draw those pelvic points in. Squeeze your glutes. Lower your knees and pause. You can untuck the toes. Re-zipper that pubic bone up. Lift the front of the throat. So if the pelvis is used to tipping forward, it doesn't feel great in the low back. So we really want to zipper the pubic bone up and use the glutes so that we can lower down using that deep core engagement all the way down. We're going to lower all the way onto the ground, making a little pillow for our head by bending the elbows, stacking the forearms on top of each other. Rest your forehead down or pick one side of your head to lie on. And as you're here in this prone position, check in with what the low back feels like. It might feel pretty uncomfortable if you're used to tipping the pelvis forward, so you might be feeling the low back here. We're going to go against that by pressing the pubic bone down. And by pressing the pubic bone down, we're finding that neutral position in the pelvis so that the low back is long and not compressed or pinching or arching. So we want that tailbone kind of just grounding straight instead of flipping up. squeeze your glutes. And we're gonna imagine the lower belly, right around the belly button, drawing up toward the sacrum this time. So it's kind of like we're trying to hollow out the belly to really feel this length and support for the low back. So there's a lot going on here. Looks like we're just napping, but the glutes are squeezing. We're using that deep core. We're drawing those pelvic points in. Hands will come under your shoulders and we'll lift back to quadruped. Set up for that neutral position here. Lift the front of the throat. Shoulders are right over your wrist creases. Draw those pelvic points in. Zipper the pubic bone up. We're gonna work our hip extension. So that's when the hip moves behind us. Flexion is when the hip comes forward and the torso comes toward the thigh. So we'll slide our right toes back on the ground and pause here. Notice if by moving that right hip, we've tipped the pelvis or arched the low back. Support the low back by zipping the pubic bone up, drawing those pelvic points in. Right knee will come back to quadruped. Keep everything neutral as you slide the left toes back. Notice if anything changed in the look or feel of the low back. Slide that left knee down. We're going to keep alternating as we slide the right toes back. If you'd like to lift the toes up any amount, you can. But make sure we're not compensating by tipping the pelvis. So really zipper that pubic bone up, lower down, just keep alternating left and right. Move as slowly as you want, but really move with control. So we're doing this mindful movement. We're not just moving the body. We're focusing on the sensations we're feeling, really paying attention to any shifts, maybe weight shifts side to side. Noticing any challenges that are different from side to side. Good, finish your last one. Right knee will step through your hands into a low lunge position. Check in with that feeling of the broom behind the back here. Now we don't want to arch the low back and we don't want to sink down. That's tipping the pelvis, which is arching the low back too. So we want to zipper that pubic bone up. Use that left glute here. So if it's not already squeezing, really squeeze it to help open the front of that left hip in a really active, supportive way. So again, we're not sinking, just superficially stretching. We're zipping that pubic bone up and really working on that active hip flexor stretch or hip extension on that left side. Bring your right hand to the back of the pelvis at the sacrum. Left arm will come up. Now think about your belly button or that deep low belly drawing back towards your right hand or back toward the sacrum. That same feeling of when we were on our stomachs, trying to hollow out the low belly. Now lift the whole left side of the body up, left shoulder blade, left fingertips. Release the right ear to the shoulder. Stay here or keep this upward lift. Side bend just in the rib cage, any amount toward the right. So we're not letting the pelvis move side to side. We're just feeling this lateral stretch around the left side of the thoracic spine. Come back up, lower the hands, step that right knee back to quadruped. Left foot steps through, set up for that low lunge. Check that pelvic bowl, zipper the pubic bone up, draw those two pelvic points in. Think about that stacking of the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum. Left hand will come to the sacrum right at the back of the pelvis. Right arm reaches up. Try to reach the whole right side of the body up. Lift the right side of the ribs, the right scapula, the right fingertips. Left ear will release to the shoulder. Keep this upward lift in the right side. Maybe take that lateral bend or that side bend to the left. Keep that right glute squeezing. Keep zippering up the pubic bone to the belly. Come back up, lower the hands, step it back to quadruped. Either stretch out the back with cat-cow. You can take child's pose, or you can go to downward dog. Any option that feels best for your low back for these next few breaths. Wherever you end up, really feel that 360 breath again. Focus on the rib cage expanding front, side, and back. Letting it all the way out as you knit those front ribs in. Feet will walk up toward the hands now. Coming back to that hip hinge or that triple flexion in the ankles, knees, and hips. Hover the torso over the thighs so we're not collapsing or rounding the back. Press into the feet, rise to stand. Shoulder blades glide up without the rib cage popping. Exhale, hinge. Hip creases move toward the back of the mat, torso toward the thighs. Step to your plank or quadruped. Set up for that neutral position from the neck, the shoulder blades, the pelvis. Zipper the pubic bone up, squeeze your glutes. Lower the knees, you can untuck the toes. Lift the throat, again, zipper the pubic bone up so the pelvis isn't dropping. Exhale down with control. Once you get down, bend the elbows, stack your forearms, rest your head on your arms. Start by pressing the pubic bone down. Now for now, if you're still working on that neutral pelvis, even just pressing the pubic bone down might feel pretty challenging. So really just focus on drawing that pubic bone down into the mat, lifting your low belly up toward the sacrum, squeezing your glutes. So it's like the whole front of the body is trying to lift up toward the back of the body. It's very active for how it looks. Hands come under the shoulders. Back to quadruped. Shoulders over your wrist. Lift the front of the throat. Imagine that broom behind your back. Now we're going to flex the hips, so the opposite of what we did in the last round. We're going to unweight the right knee and just try to bring the thigh toward the torso without any rounding in the head and neck, the upper back, the pelvis. So we're keeping that broom behind the back. Lower the right knee. Unweight the left knee. Try to bring the left thigh to the torso without anything changing in the spine or the pelvis. Alternate side to side. And again, move slowly, move with intention. Focus on the feeling in the low back, side to side. Is it different right to left? Can you work that deep core to help support the low back a little bit more? Drawing those pelvic points in. Lifting the pubic bone up. Pause with the knees down. We're going to step the right foot out to the side. Parallel the right foot so the right toes face forward. It might need to be further back for that to happen. We want to press into the pinky toe side of that right foot. Right away, that might be a stretch on the inside of the right leg. We're going to do some adductor rocks, just rocking the hips back and forth, but hold that neutral pelvis here. So draw those pelvic points in. Lift the pubic bone up. Lift the front of your throat. So we're stretching our adductors, which are a group of muscles that run along the inside of the leg, all the way up toward our groin or our pelvic floor area. Now pause in that neutral quadruped with the right leg out. Right hand will come behind the head. Stay really strong in this left shoulder and scapula. Don't let it sink down. Rotate just in the rib cage. So just the thoracic spine is going to turn about 1 inch to the right. Don't let the pelvis move. So we're not letting the right hip move. We're still drawing those pelvic points in. And then back to neutral. Rotate just in the ribs, not the pelvis or low back. 1 inch to the right. Back to center or back to neutral. One more. Turn just the rib cage to the right. Zipper the pubic bone up. Back to neutral. Lower the right hand. Bring that right knee back to quadruped. Left foot steps out to the side. Find that neutral everything from the throat to the pelvis. Left toes are parallel, pointing toward the front of the mat. Maybe the left foot is further back. Start to do those adductor rocks forward and back. But keep that feeling of the broom behind your back. So we don't want to round our back in any way. We want to hold that neutral spine as we rock forward and back, continuing to press into the pinky toe side of the left foot. Come back up to that neutral quadruped with the left leg out. Left hand comes behind the head. Hold strong in that right shoulder blade, so don't let it retract, don't let it protract. Feel it on the back of the ribs. Turn your ribs 1 inch to the left, but don't let the pelvis move. So we're still drawing those pelvic points in. Back to neutral. Rotate just the rib cage 1 inch to the left. Zipper the pubic bone up. Back to neutral. One more. Rotate the ribs to the left. Back to neutral. Lower the left hand. Left knee comes back to quadruped. Same option to either take cat-cow, child's pose, or downward dog. Check in with your low back. Wherever you end up, focus on that 360 breath. Feel the ribs expand side to side, front and back. Walk your feet forward. Really bend your knees. Work on that same triple flexion in the ankles, knees, and hips. Knees are right over the ankles. Think about that broom behind your back as you rise to stand. Shoulder blades glide up. Lower the hands. We're going to do a little bit of standing balance while we work our core and our hip flexion. Both of those things, deep core engagement and hip flexion, will help with low back pain because it's just part of that better movement habits. We're going to extend the wrists so our palms are forward. We're basically imagining we're in a plank pose right now. So just like when we're in a plank pose, think about the head stacking over the shoulders, stacking over the pelvis. Zipper the pubic bone up. Arms are nice and active, so they're not relaxed. We're holding strong. You're going to do that same hip flexion we did in quadruped, where you alternate picking up 1 foot at a time, bringing the torso toward the thigh or the thigh toward the torso without any rounding in the back or the pelvis. So we're staying in that nice upright posture and working that hip flexion. So the hip is doing the moving. The deep low belly is supporting that movement and transition. The glutes are working, so give a nice squeeze to the glutes, especially on your standing leg. So really feel everything support the low back. We don't need to lift the feet very high. Even if they're lifting 1/2 inch, that's still the action of flexing at the hip. Step your right foot back into a squat or a goddess squat. We're going to turn the toes out any amount. Bend your knees. Now check the low back here. We don't want it to be arching. So if you're feeling this in the low back, the pelvis is probably tipping forward. Zipper the pubic bone up so the low back is long, not arched, but very long. Tailbone grounding down. Bring one hand to the sacrum at the back of the pelvis, one hand to the front. Now you can either hold here and just focus on holding the neutral pelvis, which takes a lot of effort, especially if you're not yet in the habit of keeping the pelvis neutral. We want to actively draw those pelvic points in, zipper the pubic bone up. Make sure we're not rounding the upper back. Feel that 360 breath. Rib cage expands front, side, and back. As you exhale, let it all the way out. Knit those front ribs together. One more breath. Straighten your legs. Step it back to the top of the mat. Come back to that standing plank. Palms are forward. Wrists are in extension. Think about the broom behind your back. Alternate flexing your hips. So again, foot doesn't need to lift very high. You're going to go to whatever height you can without rounding or changing anything about your spine or your pelvis. So when we're moving with a neutral spine and a neutral pelvis, we have that feeling of the broom behind our back, the stacking of the back of the skull right over the shoulder blades, over the sacrum. Use that deep low belly to help this transition be more strong, more stable, and more supportive to the low back. So the low back shouldn't be moving while we do this. It should be holding really still. Now step your left foot back for that squat. Turn toward the side of the mat. Bend your knees. Zipper the pubic bone up. Think about that stacking of the triple S. Hands come to front and back of the pelvis. Compress and squeeze those hands together so we can really encourage that neutral pelvis. Now, as you focus on your 360 breath on this side, you can stay still or you can pulse. Now, you can pulse as slowly as you want, but we're really thinking about glutes, glutes, glutes while we pulse, because again, glutes are part of the muscles that help to support the low back. We use our glutes for hip extension, hip flexion, balancing. They're part of the core. So we really want to use all those muscles together to help the low back stay strong and mobile. Straighten your legs, step it back to the top of your mat. Head back into quadruped so we can start to stretch it out with cat-cow. Now, if you want to take that regular cat-cow where the whole spine flexes and extends, stick with that. If you want to do that lumbar cat-cow, really just bringing your awareness to the low back or the back of the pelvis at the sacrum. If it feels good, move side to side and get a little bit more of a stretch in that QL area. So just move in whatever way feels good. You can circle it. Anything you'd like. One more breath. We'll come into a child's pose of any kind. Knees can be as wide as you'd like. Arms can extend out, or you can bend at the elbows, resting forehead on your arms. And wherever you end up, you can let your eyes close. We're going to focus on that 360 breath. On this first big breath in, focus on the ribs expanding side to side. Letting it all the way out. On your next inhale, focus on the ribs expanding front to back. Letting it all the way out. Good. Bring our awareness to the back. As you inhale, imagine your breath moving up into just the backs of the ribs, kind of broadening the upper back. Let it all the way out. Now we're going to start to work our way down to the low back. On your next inhale, imagine your breath moving up into the thoracic spine, right about where the rib cage is at the back. Fully exhale. Now we're going to focus on the low back. As you inhale, imagine your breath moving up toward the sacrum or up to the low back. As if you could create more space in the low back. Exhaling it all the way out. Come onto your back. We'll have the knees bent, checking that triple S again. Feet on the mat, feel the sacrum down on the mat, the shoulder blades and the back of the skull. And again, just notice, does the sacrum naturally touch the ground, or do you have to adjust a little bit to get that neutral pelvis? Keeping that sacrum down, pick up your right foot and flex it. Cross it over the left thigh. We're going to focus on this stretch in the outer right hip. So if this is already a stretch, stick with this. If you'd like to press the right hand into the right thigh, moving that right knee away from you, you can take that option. If you want to go a little bit further, goal post your arms, bend the elbows, pick up the left foot. So by flexing the left hip, bringing the left thigh toward the torso, we're going to deepen the stretch in the right hip. If you want to rock a little bit side to side, you can. Focusing on that expansive 360 breath. Breathing through our movement and our stretches. So we can keep the mind and body a little bit more calm. Release it down, switch sides. Pick up the left foot and flex it, cross it over the right thigh. Stay here, maybe take the left hand, press that left thigh away, or goal post your arms, pick up the right foot to whatever height feels good as you go deeper into that left hip stretch. Wherever you end up with the legs, make sure the sacrum is down on the mat, the shoulder blades and the back of the skull. Add a little gentle rocking side to side if that feels good. Release it down. Pick up your right foot. Now we're going to grab the right shin or anywhere we can grab as we move into a passive hip flexion, really encouraging this right thigh toward the torso without letting the sacrum lift up. So keep that triple S down. Stay here, or maybe start to slide that left leg out a little bit longer if that feels good. But just check in, make sure that feels okay at the back of the pelvis, right at the sacrum. Bring that left foot back to the mat, right foot back to the mat. Flex the left hip, grab onto the shin or wherever you can grab as you ease this left thigh toward the torso. Staying here with the sacrum down or sliding that right leg out if that feels okay on the right hip, the right knee, and the lower back. Release it down out of your stretch. This time we're going to hug both knees in. Grab wherever you can grab and start by just letting the head rock side to side a few times. And then rock around the sacrum. So you can rock side to side, up and down. You can make circles. Or you can take a happy baby if it feels good to lift up the feet and rock on the sacrum. When you're ready, make your way into any comfortable position for Shavasana. Legs can extend out if that feels good in the low back, or keep the knees bent. Work on that sacrum staying down. Arms can rest anywhere you'd like. Eyes will close. Wiggle your jaw around until it feels relaxed. Relax the space between your eyebrows. Coming back to whatever your natural breath is. Checking in with how you feel in your mind and body. Stay here as long as you'd like.